In the late 19th century, long before the name Titanic would ever be etched into history as a symbol of human ambition and tragedy, a little-known novelist named Morgan Robertson wrote a book that seemed almost prophetic. The novel, published in 1898, was titled Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan, At the time, it was just another piece of speculative fiction, a sea story about a grand ocean liner that met a disastrous fate. Yet as the years passed, this work of imagination would come to be seen as one of the most astonishing coincidences in literary history, because it appeared to foreshadow in uncanny detail the sinking of the Titanic, an event that would not occur until 1912. The Titan, the fictional ship in Robertson's novel, was described as the largest vessel of its time, a marvel of modern engineering that was considered practically unsinkable. In the story, this gigantic ship carried the wealthiest passengers of society across the Atlantic, promising speed, luxury, and safety. But the narrative takes a dark turn when the Titan strikes an iceberg on a cold April night in the North Atlantic. With too few lifeboats to save the thousands aboard, chaos unfolds, and countless lives are lost in the icy waters. If this description sounds eerily familiar, it is because the real Titanic would meet almost the same fate in reality 14 years later. When the Titanic was launched in 1912, it was heralded as the pinnacle of human achievement in shipbuilding. It was the largest passenger liner in the world, stretching more than 880 feet, with cutting-edge technology and lavish accommodations that made it a floating palace. Newspapers of the time hailed it as unsinkable, a ship so advanced that it seemed to defy the laws of nature. On its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York, it carried some of the wealthiest individuals in the world, along with hundreds of emigrants seeking a new life in America. But on the night of April 14, 1912, disaster struck when the Titanic collided with an iceberg. Within hours, the mighty vessel slipped beneath the waves, taking more than 1,500 lives with it. The parallels to Robertson's fictional tale were so striking that many began to wonder, had the author predicted the disaster? The similarities between the Titan of fiction and the Titanic of history go far beyond surface-level coincidence. In Futility, the Titan was said to be about 800 feet long, just slightly smaller than the Titanic's 882 feet. Both ships were triple-screw ocean liners, designed for unmatched speed and luxury. Both were described as unsinkable by those who marveled at their engineering. And most chillingly, both carried far too few lifeboats for the number of passengers on board. Robertson's Titan carried only 24 lifeboats, while the real Titanic carried 20, both catastrophically inadequate for ships that carried more than 2,000 people. In both cases, the lack of lifeboats became one of the central reasons why the tragedies claimed so many lives. Even the circumstances of the disasters seem eerily aligned. In Robertson's novel, the Titan strikes an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic, traveling at high speed despite warnings of dangerous ice in the area. In reality, the Titanic also struck an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic, while traveling at near full speed after ignoring multiple ice warnings. Both disasters occurred on freezing nights with calm seas and a clear sky. Both resulted in massive loss of life, particularly among the poorer passengers trapped in the lower decks. The similarities are so precise that readers who first revisited Robertson's novel after the Titanic disaster could hardly believe it had been written more than a decade earlier. Morgan Robertson himself insisted that he was not a prophet. He claimed that his story was not based on supernatural foresight, but on a deep understanding of maritime trends and technological ambitions of his time. As a former sailor and an experienced writer of sea tales, Robertson was familiar with the increasing obsession of the late 19th century with building larger, faster, and more luxurious ships. He observed that shipbuilders were pushing the limits of design, often prioritizing speed and prestige over safety. In particular, he noticed that lifeboats were treated as an afterthought, considered unnecessary on ships thought to be unsinkable. From these observations, Robertson crafted his fictional Titan, a cautionary tale meant to highlight the dangers of human arrogance in the face of nature's power. Yet, despite Robertson's practical explanation, the uncanny parallels remain hard to ignore. After the Titanic disaster, Futility was republished, this time under the shortened title, The Wreck of the Titan, and it gained renewed attention as readers marveled at the foresight it seemed to contain. Some even speculated that Robertson had tapped into something deeper, a kind of unconscious knowledge of the future. In an age where spiritualism and belief in the supernatural were still widespread, many wondered if his novel was more than just fiction. The legend of Robertson's prediction grew over time, and today it is often cited as one of history's strangest coincidences. It raises profound questions about the boundary between imagination and reality. Was Futility merely a work of speculative fiction that happened to mirror a future event? Or did it, in some strange way, anticipate what was destined to happen? The mystery continues to fascinate historians, writers, and readers alike. Morgan Robertson himself was a fascinating figure, one who never fully received recognition during his lifetime. Born in 1861 in Oswego, New York, he spent much of his youth at sea, working as a merchant sailor. The long voyages and the challenges of life on the water gave him a first-hand understanding of ships, sailors, and the dangers of the ocean. When he eventually turned to writing, he brought with him a wealth of practical knowledge, which lent authenticity to his sea stories. Robertson was not regarded as a literary giant, but his works were appreciated for their technical accuracy and vivid storytelling. It was this same practical familiarity with ships and the shipping industry that allowed him to imagine the Titan so convincingly. When asked later about the eerie similarities between his novel and the Titanic disaster, Robertson dismissed the idea that he was some kind of clairvoyant. He explained that his creation of the Titan was simply a projection of where maritime engineering was heading. In the late 1800s, shipping companies were locked in fierce competition to build bigger and faster ocean liners. These vessels were not only symbols of national pride, but also practical tools for moving emigrants, goods, and wealthy passengers between Europe and America. To Robertson, it was only natural that shipbuilders would eventually construct a massive liner like the Titan, boasting luxury and speed above all else. He also recognized the potential dangers of such arrogance, the assumption that man's technological advancements could conquer the sea itself. The novel Futility was, in many ways, less a prophecy and more a warning. Yet, even if Robertson's intentions were purely rational, the uncanny resemblance between fiction and reality has never ceased to capture the imagination. It is not just the size, the speed, or even the iceberg that makes the connection so compelling. It is the theme. Both the Titan and the Titanic represent humanity's overconfidence, the belief that technology and wealth can shield us from the raw, untamable forces of nature. Robertson's novel struck this note with striking clarity, and the real Titanic disaster drove the point home with devastating finality. After the Titanic sank in 1912, the story spread around the world almost instantly. Newspapers from New York to London were filled with the harrowing details: the shortage of lifeboats, the orchestra playing as the ship went down, the stories of bravery and cowardice that unfolded in the icy waters of the Atlantic. Amid this media frenzy, readers rediscovered Robertson's forgotten book, and suddenly he was thrust into the spotlight. Copies of Futility were reissued under the new title, The Wreck of the Titan, and journalists pointed out page after page of similarities to the Titanic disaster. For a time, Robertson became the reluctant author of what many saw as a chilling prophecy. But despite the renewed attention, Robertson's life did not transform into one of fame and fortune. In fact, he struggled financially for much of his life and passed away in 1915, only a few years after the Titanic tragedy. His death went largely unnoticed by the public, overshadowed by the Great War that was engulfing the world. Yet, His name has lived on because of this strange coincidence, ensuring that he would never be completely forgotten. The Titanic disaster itself became more than just a maritime tragedy. It became a cultural symbol. To many, it marked the end of an era of blind faith in progress and the beginning of a more cautious 20th century. The Titanic was not just a ship. It was a metaphor for human ambition and the limits of technology. Its sinking exposed the arrogance of believing that man could build something immune to nature's wrath. In that sense, Robertson's fictional Titan and the real Titanic were not just parallel stories. They were part of a larger narrative about hubris and humility, about the delicate balance between human achievement and the forces of the natural world. Even today, more than a century after the Titanic sank, people remain captivated by the connection to Robertson's novel. Theories have been spun about whether he had some mysterious insight into the future. Some suggest that his subconscious mind, informed by his maritime experience, pieced together a vision of what was inevitable. Others entertain more mystical explanations, wondering if there are patterns in history that certain individuals can intuitively sense. Whatever the explanation, the coincidence serves as a reminder that truth can sometimes be stranger than fiction. Beyond its mysterious aura, Robertson's novel and the Titanic disaster together also highlight the importance of heeding warnings. Both in fiction and in reality, warnings about ice were ignored. Both ships sailed too fast through dangerous waters, confident in their supposed invulnerability. This pattern echoes throughout history, warnings dismissed, lessons unlearned, until tragedy strikes. Perhaps the real legacy of the Titan and the Titanic is not the uncanny coincidence, but the lesson that arrogance and neglect can be just as dangerous as storms and icebergs. As time passed, the Titanic became a subject of endless fascination for historians, filmmakers, and storytellers. From Walter Lord's book, A Night to Remember, to James Cameron's iconic film Titanic, the story has been retold in countless forms. Yet, lurking in the background of every retelling is the strange case of Morgan Robertson's novel, a haunting piece of fiction that seems to have anticipated it all. Whenever people discuss the Titanic, sooner or later someone brings up Futility, and the legend of its eerie prophecy continues to grow. The story of Robertson and his Titan invites us to think about the mysterious relationship between imagination and reality. Writers invent worlds, scenarios, and characters, often inspired by the trends and possibilities of their time. Yet, occasionally, those imagined worlds align with future events in ways that feel almost supernatural. Was Robertson simply extrapolating from what he observed, or was there something more at work? We may never have a definitive answer, but the question itself adds another layer of intrigue to the Titanic's enduring legacy. The Titanic's sinking, and the strange shadow cast over it by Robertson's novel, left an imprint not just on history, but on the collective imagination of humanity. When people hear the story of the Titan and the Titanic, it is not just the technical similarities that grip them. It is the sense of mystery, the idea that perhaps there are patterns woven into the fabric of history that occasionally reveal themselves through art, literature, or dreams. For many, this coincidence suggests that reality and imagination may not be as far apart as we often assume. The cultural fascination with the Titanic has endured for more than a century, and with it, the story of Robertson's novel continues to resurface. Whenever the Titanic is revisited in documentaries, books, or films, someone inevitably mentions Futility as one of the strangest coincidences in literary history. It captures the human love for mysteries, for stories that blur the line between chance and destiny. People are naturally drawn to the idea of prophecy, to the possibility that someone could glimpse the future, even if by accident. Robertson's novel satisfies this curiosity, offering a tangible example of a work of fiction that seemed to step into reality. At the same time, the parallels between the Titan and the Titanic also remind us of a timeless lesson about human ambition. Both vessels embodied the pride of their age, technological marvels meant to conquer the sea and demonstrate the power of human ingenuity. Yet in both fiction and reality, this confidence was shattered by nature's indifference. An iceberg, a simple, silent block of ice, brought down the greatest creations of humankind. This contrast between ambition and vulnerability is one of the reasons the story resonates so deeply. It is not only about ships or maritime tragedy, it is about the eternal tension between what humans strive to build and the natural world that surrounds them. The aftermath of the Titanic disaster also reshaped the way people viewed safety at sea. International regulations were overhauled, lifeboat requirements were drastically increased, ice patrols were established in the Atlantic, and safety drills became mandatory. In a strange way, Robertson's fictional warning, ignored by most when it was published, became a grim reality that forced real-world change. The Titan may not have been real, but the lesson it carried echoed through the reforms that followed the Titanic's sinking. In this sense, Futility became not only a curious coincidence, but also a symbolic companion to the real tragedy, a story that had warned of the very mistakes that would one day prove catastrophic. For historians and literary scholars, the Robertson-Titanic connection is a reminder of how fiction can sometimes mirror reality with uncanny accuracy. This is not unique to Futility. Throughout history, works of imagination have occasionally anticipated real events. Jules Verne wrote of submarines and space travel long before they existed. H.G. Wells speculated about atomic weapons decades before their invention. In Robertson's case, however, the details were so precise, the timing so close, that his work has become the most famous example of what some call fictional prophecy. It forces us to wonder whether writers, by studying their world and pushing its possibilities to the extreme, sometimes stumble upon visions of the future. In modern times, the story of Robertson's Titan and the Titanic continues to inspire debate. Some dismiss it as nothing more than a coincidence, an extraordinary one, but still coincidence. Others believe that Robertson tapped into something deeper, whether it was a subconscious pattern he sensed in the world of shipbuilding or something beyond rational explanation. Regardless of interpretation, the fascination endures because it touches on questions that go beyond ships and literature. It asks us to consider fate, chance, and the hidden connections between imagination and reality. More than a century later, the Titanic story remains as powerful as ever. Museums, exhibitions, films, and novels keep the memory alive. Survivors' testimonies are still read and studied, and artifacts recovered from the wreck continue to travel the world, drawing millions of visitors. And alongside this ongoing fascination, Robertson's book remains a haunting footnote, a reminder that sometimes the line between fiction and history blurs in ways that defy explanation. The Titan may have been a creation of imagination, but in its fate, it became forever linked with the most famous maritime disaster in history. Ultimately, the tale of Futility and the Titanic is more than just a story of eerie coincidence. It is a parable about the limits of human ambition, the importance of humility, and the strange ways in which imagination can anticipate reality. It challenges us to think about the stories we tell, the warnings we ignore, and the mysteries that still linger in the relationship between art and life. Morgan Robertson could never have known when he wrote his Sea Tale in 1898 that he would be remembered not as a great novelist, but as the man who seemed to foresee the greatest shipwreck of all time. And perhaps that is fitting. His novel was titled Futility, a word that captures both the hubris of man and the unstoppable force of fate. In the end, whether prophecy or coincidence, the wreck of the Titan and the sinking of the Titanic will forever remain intertwined, two stories that echo across history, reminding us of the fragility of even our greatest creations.